The POW story can be summarized in the last phrase of the poem Invictus. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Our target was Hongai, which was a naval base out in the Tonkin Gulf. I was the first one off the number 2 catapult. As we went by, I looked back and the whole sky lit up with flak. The whole sky just started turning black all around me. And I was low and fast as a plane would go. I heard a poof. It was just like a white flash. My cockpit immediately started to fill with smoke. It didn't take long to figure out that I couldn't control it. My nose was dropping, but I knew that if I stuck in the plane, I wasn't going to last. I couldn't have made it. The only chance I had was to pull the face curtain, and I went out. And I felt the boom, the big chute popped, and before I knew it, I was in the water. That was on a Wednesday, August 5th, 1964. The irony was that later on, after I was shot down, I recall that, I said, of all things happened to me at that day, I said, you know, that Wednesday is roast beef night on the ship. And when I was floating in the water, I'm thinking, amongst other things, it's crazy, but I figured I'm going to miss roast beef night.
Warplanes from 2 carriers, the Ticonderoga and the Constellation, the U.S. sorties were launched to North Vietnam PT bases. The Pentagon said 2 pilots were lost. One was reported to be a prisoner of the Reds.
They took me out to interrogation, and there were 2 officers. And it was at that point where I gave name, rank, service number, date of birth, and they started asking me other questions. I said, I can't tell you. Geneva Agreements, that's what they said there are. We never signed the Geneva Agreements. We're not at war. We have not declared war. You're a criminal. And you will be treated as a criminal.
It's a very powerful way of framing this. We all struggle trying to define ourselves. And I think for warriors involved in combat operations, you want to see yourself as a good guy. And the more that the North Vietnamese used that device to refer to them as criminals, it was a weapon of psychological warfare that meant to chip away at the story that the POWs carried about themselves and about their honor.
My name is Everett Alvarez, Jr. My service number is 644124.
And certainly everything that we know of the POWs is a story of how they resisted that characterization.
I found myself totally cut off from the world, isolated. I was the only American there for 6 months, and I was really in isolation. The first Christmas there was a very lonely Christmas. Early February, there was news of the Voice of Vietnam, and it talked about another raid, and this time they had shot down and captured a pilot, Robert Shumaker. I remember thinking, wow, I'm not alone.
So I was captured and then led off, and I think this photograph was taken as I was being led off, and it was just my resolution. I think if I were to title that picture, it'd be resolution that, by God, I was going to make my nation proud of me by not rolling over as a POW to the demands of the enemy. I was handcuffed, put me in a Jeep-like vehicle and transported 200 miles north to the capital city of Hanoi. And I was put into a prison that the French had built, and it was called the Fiery Furnace, or in Vietnamese, the Hoa Lo prison. There were apparently a lot of common criminals that were using up a lot of other cells, and the Vietnamese had to make room for subsequent POWs, so they somehow moved these civilian prisoners out. But before they were able to accomplish that, they moved 3 POWs in with me, and one guy's name was Phil Butler, and one was Smitty Harris, and another was Bob Peel. And I was the senior guy there. I was the lieutenant commander. And I said, hey, you know, they're going to try to separate us later on, so we ought to figure some way to stay in contact. So one guy said, well, why don't we try writing on the backs of the lunch pails? So we tried that. We tried to contact Alvarez that way, and it just didn't work out. So anyway, I said, we got to think of something else.
And Smitty one day told us, he said, you know, there's something I learned in Air Force survival. And he said that this thing was taught to us. They called it a TAP code. He said, I don't know if it's going to be worth anything or not.
And it was called the AFLQV code. And it got its name because in a 5x5 square that had 5 rows and 5 columns, you can put the alphabet if you leave off the letter K. And so to send a message, you would first say, well, I have to make sure that it was an American on the other side of the wall. And the way you would know that there was an American, not a Vietnamese, on the other side of the wall was we would tap shave and a haircut, 2 bits. That's something that was very common to my generation. It sounds like this. And then the answer from the other side would be. So we knew there was an American there.
Commander Shumaker, he makes that final call. Thankfully, he does that because it's a means of communication that survives throughout the experience of all of these POWs, and some of them are there 7, 8, or more years. And it's incredibly important that they put that in place.
Really, it was our lifesaver.
The covert communication system we had was we recognized that it was the one element of our existence that was important for our survival.
Then started a series of interrogations, and we military people are sworn to abide by a code called the Big Four. And the Big Four means you're obliged to give only your name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. This code was developed through the Geneva Conventions, which basically said that captive POWs were to be treated fairly and not inhumanely and not tortured. But Vietnam decided not to abide by those rules, and as was to be experienced in the next 8 years, they did indeed resort to torture.
It was 1966 that things started to get rough. Things gradually got harsher and harsher.
You know, I still suffer. I don't have a lot of feeling in my thumbs right now, and they shoved an iron bar down my throat to keep me from screaming, and so I have trouble with my speech pattern. They apparently caused some damage there. The physical torture is excruciating, but you know, equally excruciating is when, say, your cellmate or someone you know is off being tortured, and there's nothing you can do about it. It just tears you apart, and you just have to sit there and absorb it all.
The first time they came after me, I resisted, and he went for days and days. They used these big manacles that cut off the blood circulation and gave a lot of pain. And after about a day of that, I broke. I had broken the bond. I had betrayed my fellow POWs. I just felt so bad.
I remember going back to my cell and just crying and crying about, I'd let my country down, my family down. And even now it's a little hard talking about it. What I hope you get out of this film is that you can overcome adversity. What you have to learn to do, though, is you have to get up off the canvas like any good boxer would and get ready for the next round. You have to learn to bounce back and be resilient.
Everett Alvarez Jr., Robert Shumaker.
Today, the largest contingents of repatriated prisoners so far, 60 men, were flown from Clark to Travis Air Force Base, California.
Our story is that we made it through that experience together. Use our story as an example. So when you face life's challenges, don't make it difficult by thinking you can handle it yourself. You can't.
James Bond started.
You have to have friends, you have to have a team with the same goal. And in our case, our goal was to come home, but we were going to come home with our honor, return with honor.
We're quite excited today as we proceed on east, and we'll soon be reunited with our families. And I thank you all here.
We came back from that experience with a higher regard for ourselves and for our fellow POWs.
Today's most dramatic moment came when Everett Alvarez made his happy trek down the ramp, home at last.
What Charlie sometimes says is they're the poster boys for PTG.
And I remember talking with Charlie Plum. He said, I didn't have a term for this, but when I heard about post-traumatic growth, I connected immediately to my experience. Post-traumatic growth is the positive change that people report in the struggle that they go through in the aftermath of adversity.
And Charlie, who's very learned, he went and read like we sent him a bunch of your stuff. And there was something powerful about that this was like a recognized and acknowledged science, that it was real.
There was a study that was published in 1980. William Sledge was a psychiatrist in the Air Force who was tasked with assessing the psychological state of the POWs when they were repatriated. What Sledge first found was a surprise that they had done so well. It wasn't what he expected, and this wasn't what anybody expected.
I think in a way, that experience was like putting you into a fire and like steel, and in a way it tempered it, it hardened it. You can measure it in terms of a stronger person, a person of stronger character. It made us better people with a higher regard for ourselves and for our fellow POWs.
We welcome you to Arlington National Cemetery for the burial of Michael Paul Cronin.
We gather to celebrate the life of an American hero. Perhaps we should listen to what Admiral Stockdale said of him. Mike has absolute integrity. He is a man of high moral and physical courage, and set an example that few could equal and none surpass.
Yeah, you think a lot about death as you approach my age, because a lot of my friends are peeling off now and flying west. As you get older, you think about what your legacy is. Yeah, you realize that the curtain's about to fall one of these days, and you hope that what you did and how you influenced other people was for the better.
We're here to celebrate and to express our gratitude and our absolute respect to Captain Jerry Coffey.
I first met Jerry summer of 1970, and I found myself being let into a cell, and there was Jerry. Jerry was my cellmate for many years, became a very close friend. He was very sensitive, concerned about others. He was the first to come to the support and aid of someone who was in need, and I benefited from this concern he had for others one year when I received devastating news from home. And I have to tell you that I was in the dumps for weeks. What happened to my wife and our relationship, I think, is a tragedy, because she basically gave up waiting for me after so many years and without hope. And so she divorced me. And Jerry never left my side. He walked with me. He talked to me, consoled me. I can't blame anybody. I can understand. It was just something I didn't want to talk about it publicly. Those are personal stories. There's a lot of them. That's a tragedy of war. He had such an optimistic nature, he would not let me lose hope. But he felt my pain. And he proved himself to be a true friend. Because, Jerry, you were my friend. You always will be. And so the story is, and the legacy is, to carry this experience on and tell it to others so that they can use it in their achievement and in their challenges of life.